Thank you for joining us for our Honoring Black History Town Hall, the State of Black Tampa Bay. I'm Deanne King. Tonight, we'll be discussing topics and issues that affect our Black communities all over the Tampa Bay area. Difficult topics, including law enforcement, Black home ownership, and how Black history is taught in our schools. Over the next hour, we will hear from local experts, civic and community leaders, and educators. Our goal is to discuss these issues, question lawmakers, and look for possible solutions. And of course, we'll hear from you, the people who live in Tampa Bay. We'll address some of your concerns directly, concerns like these.
If we really aren't teaching CRT or we're not being allowed to, what's going to replace that?
Our panel of experts are waiting to offer some answers. We will get started right after this.
Everybody who is here in America, you have a right to have your culture, your history respected and taught to the children of America.
That's attorney and civil rights leader Ben Crump recently, who threatened to sue Governor DeSantis over the state's rejection of an advanced placement course on African American studies. Florida's Department of Education wants topics like critical race theory, Black queer studies, and intersectionality removed. Changes are already being made to the curriculum. In fact, those changes began on the first day of Black History Month when the College Board released their framework for AP African American classes. I spoke to a local high school history teacher and students at USF about their thoughts on censoring Black history lessons in the classroom.
There are a lot of ugly parts of our history.
From slavery to the Holocaust to the murder of George Floyd, all pieces of American history that may no longer be taught in schools.
Sometimes we are the only source that they get for information, so to have to be able to tell them no on stuff that we think they should be learning, it's unfortunate.
Elise Spiller is a local high school history teacher. She believes the potential banning of teaching critical race theory in schools is jeopardizing students' education.
I think part of the purpose of education is to produce well-educated and well-rounded students and give them the tools that they need to go out into society and be functioning citizens. And I think they need things like critical race theory.
Governor DeSantis proposed a bill that stops businesses and schools from discussing or teaching critical race theory, which examines the civil rights movement, racism, and social justice movements.
We believe an important component of freedom in the state of Florida is the freedom from having oppressive ideologies imposed upon you without your consent.
More recently, Governor DeSantis rejected the AP African American History class, forcing the College Board to create new framework. Released on the first day of Black History Month, the board removed a lot of the course and made many topics optional, having a big impact on teachers like Spiller.
As teachers, it's hard because, you do get kids who ask the question, Miss Spiller, why don't we learn about this? Or why can't we do this? And for us to have to say, oh, because the governor won't let us or we're not allowed to.
Students at USF say they're impacted by these changes as well.
This legislation is really a shame because it really rejects Black history.
This isn't happening with other ethnic groups, so it feels like an attack on my Blackness.
Not only is Tabria Snowden a grad student, she also teaches undergraduates.
It makes me feel sad for my students because they can't get an even playing ground of what history was without making things political.
She hopes her culture and history isn't removed from schools, but if it is, it leaves teachers like Spiller with one question.
If we really aren't teaching CRT or we're not being allowed to, what's going to replace that?
And we just heard from an educator here within Hillsborough County, but now we're joined by Dr. David Patton, a USF professor, and you teach classes in Africana Studies. How are you having to restructure the way that you teach your courses, and what's your advice to fellow educators?
Yeah, so the great thing about this Stop Woke law is that it's a very ambiguous law, and its parameters are very vague. So what I've done is I've taken my critical race theory seminar, which is just for graduate students, and I have brought HB7 into the classroom, and I've had students do analyses of that law. And one of the things that we found is the law doesn't mention critical race theory. It doesn't even mention really the tenets of critical race theory. It's a law that's based on a whole bunch of suppositions that are meant to rouse people's feelings, negative attitudes about Black studies, but there's nothing that prohibits an actual interrogation of the kinds of ideas that we would teach in CRT. And critical race theory is really about analyzing the law as a form of social power. And as a descendant of critical legal studies, it compels us to question how race is a form of social power as well. So for me, the law doesn't actually prohibit the teaching of critical race theory, but it invites a critical race analysis of what's happening right here and now in the state of Florida.
You're saying it actually kind of brings a different perspective in, right?
Yeah, I think if you want to be empowered as an educator and empowered as a student, then it's incumbent upon us to be responsible citizens and take a really close look at the things that are directed at us, in this case a piece of legislation, and see how power is working there, and that itself is doing critical race theory.
Very well said. Thank you for that. We're going to bring in our other panelists this evening, starting with Representative Fentress Driscoll. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, you were once a Polk County student. You now represent Tampa residents and Hillsborough County residents. How are you advocating for Black and brown students?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you so much for the panel. You know, I believe that Black history is American history, and so we must push for the full and accurate teaching of our history. I'll tell you that even with the bad bill that was just mentioned, the Stop Woke Act that passed, even though I was against the bill, I was able to get it amended to try to make it a little better and require teaching of the full African diaspora with respect to Black history. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the laws that require teaching Black history in our schools are being fully enforced. And we, of course, have seen the governor's recent attack on the AP African American history class. I am proud that I was able to get around $750,000 in the budget last year for teaching about abandoned African American cemeteries in our schools across Tampa Bay to make sure that that is a part of the curriculum, so that we make sure that students learn about what happened in our racially segregated past and make sure that those sort of atrocities don't happen again.
Thank you for your input, Representative Driscoll. I also want to address Professor Reginald Ellis as a current history professor at FAMU, a very well-known HBCU, specifically here in Florida. Can you talk about what your response was when you learned about this legislation seeking to ban critical race theory, and how has that ultimately impacted you in the classroom with your students at FAMU?
Oh yeah, so when we first heard about it about a year or so ago, because we don't teach critical race theory in our history courses, as the panelists earlier spoke about being really in legal courses and things of that nature, we were unbothered by the concept of banning critical race theory in the idea of teaching African American history, because we continue, my colleagues, we continue to teach history the way we've always taught it. We continue to research the history the way we've always researched, and we continue to write about it the way we've always written about it. And so it hasn't bothered or it hasn't hindered anything that we are currently doing here at Florida A&M University.
Very well said. U.S. Congresswoman Kathy Castor, thank you for joining us this evening. I have to ask you, as Tampa Bay's voice in Congress, what role do you play in advocating for a community who honestly kind of feels a little bit slight right now, like a little bit of their history is being erased from the curriculum?
Yeah, well, Governor DeSantis and the GOP-controlled legislature, they are wrong to target African-American studies. Rep. Driscoll is correct that African-American history is American history, and there is no way for us to fully tackle the issues in society today without understanding slavery, without understanding the Civil War, the Jim Crow past, the struggle for civil rights, and the rich history and arts and culture of the African-American community. So it's vitally important for leaders to speak out, for community members to push back on this extreme turn at the highest echelons in Florida state government. What people want, they want a full range of historical facts for their kids. And at the federal level, we're going to continue to press for the state of Florida not to violate the civil rights of our students. We are going to continue to send monies back home to teach African American history, just like the recent community project for Hillsborough County to build its first African American Arts and Cultural Center in West Tampa. That's on its way. That will help teach everyone across the community about African American history in our own backyard. And then there is a new grant initiative, a new bill that's been filed here in Congress to expand monies that go to African American history across the country, the type of cultural centers we're building. And I have to highlight the fact that we've just kicked out a statue in the United States Capitol of a Civil War Confederate general that represented the state of Florida for 100 years and installed the statue of the great educator, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And at that ceremony, my colleague, Congressman Jim Clyburn, said that we cannot change history and we should not try. And I'm thrilled that she now is a beacon for everyone who comes to the U.S. Capitol to learn about her legacy and the legacy of African American history.
And thank you for that input, Congresswoman. I want to bring up a statement from the College Board CEO. He says the new framework for AP African American history says no one is excluded from this course, including Black artists, gay Americans, those from the Civil Rights Movement. He says, quote, everyone is seen. Now I want to bring in Mr. Cyrus Driver, Network Director at the Partnership for the Future of Learning. Thank you for being here this evening. So do you believe these new political measures give students an honest education?
No, I don't. And I think the other panelists have all spoken well to this. You know, you can't have an honest representation of history if you don't speak about the good things that have happened. And, you know, I think the College Board exam does that, but also some of the real challenges that we've faced in American society, the difficulties that I think Representative Castor just described and Representative Driscoll as well. We have to pay attention to those. Students want, and I think families want, and I know educators want, a real statement about, they want an education that really provides an honest teaching of the truth, both the good and the challenging aspects of our country. That's how we learn, and that's what people want. They want the facts.
Some great input there. I do know we have a couple of questions from people in the community. Let's take a listen.
As a state representative and a congresswoman, how are you making sure that you protect students and teachers like myself who have to share Black history?
And if you could really quickly, Representative Driscoll, give your input and followed by Congresswoman Castor.
Right. I stand with our teachers. I stand with our teachers when it comes to making sure that they receive the pay that they deserve. I stand with teachers when it comes to making sure that they don't have to be subject to all these attacks that's happening on education, K through 12, as well as at the college and university level. And I think we just have to continue to push back. You know, I try to stand up for our unions, especially our teacher unions, to make sure that they can protect our educators in the way that they need to. And I will always push back against any law that makes it illegal to teach Black history in an accurate way.
Congresswoman Castor, we have just a few seconds for your final thoughts to answer this student.
In addition to the important pushback, we have to continue here at the federal level to support our schools through Title I, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, fund Head Start, and other initiatives like Pell Grant to ensure that all students have access to a high quality education, and then work to make sure that the curriculum is fair and doesn't violate our civil rights laws.
And thank you for your input. Thank you, Dr. Patton, for joining us and giving us that different perspective on how educators can actually approach this new season it seems like that we are in. Thank you to our wonderful panel here. Now, coming up, the conversation continues as we address how minorities are disproportionately affected by the housing crisis. A new group of local leaders and experts will join us with more on that coming up next.
Housing has increased tremendously where they can't afford it. And even the kids, they can't even move from their parents because they can't afford the housing. You know, and where's that coming from?
It's no secret Americans from coast to coast are struggling to find affordable housing right now. That includes many people right here in Tampa. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the Tampa-St. Petersburg metropolitan area has the highest rate of homelessness in the nation. And about 40% of those affected are Black Americans. Our Xavier Harris sits down with one family who says they are running out of options.
The Aker family was once living the American dream, a home, stable job, and healthy kids. The pandemic came and blindsided them, and they lost just about everything. And now they're homeless, forced to live in motels, cars, which almost cost them their lives. For Vivian and Damarian Aker and their 3 kids, this tiny Brandon motel room is home.
It ain't a day that we don't fight to get up. It ain't a day that we don't be honest and confess, God, this is hard.
But it always wasn't this way.
We were doing so good.
Before the pandemic, the Akers lived in a 3-bedroom apartment in Tampa, but COVID closures caused both of them to lose their jobs, and unemployment wasn't enough to keep up with the rent. Then, the eviction ban was lifted.
It was a field day for the landlords. Like, they was ready, had the papers ready, and I don't feel like that's right.
Forced to move out of their apartment and live on the street, the couple says they tried every program they could to get help.
Got to run around a lot, actually.
We still touch base with them throughout email, but we still get the same email. Unfortunately, at this time, it's still full.
Every time. It's like, what's it called, the running race.
Soon, the Akers were living out of their car or motel rooms like this one, but being homeless brought with it other dangers, things they couldn't even anticipate.
I hear, and I know this sound, you feel me? So I'm like, wait a minute, something in me just told, get down, and I go to pull my oldest down.
Vivian was shot in the head. Tampa police call it a random shooting.
I'm coming to her side and I open the door, she like falls out. And I'm like, babe, and I pick her up. And when I pick her up, I see the hole that's in her head. And I'm like, no, Lord, no.
Vivian was rushed to the hospital where she would spend the next month recovering. After being released, she couldn't work. That made finding a new home even harder. So they looked for help again, but found they couldn't qualify. And with not enough money for rent, they made this motel room home. The Akers say even that wouldn't have been possible without the help from a GoFundMe account.
The community was the main reason, by the grace of God,
why we're still in here right now.
Why we were in here, because of our GoFundMe.
But as for what will happen in the future, Vivian, Damarian, and their kids are left to wonder if they'll ever have another home to call their own.
What is it like being Black in Tampa Bay?
God, you feel like a little ant. I'm born and raised here and still feel like I'm unseen.
Reporting in Brandon, I'm Xavier Harris.
And we begin this conversation with Mr. Leroy Moore, the Senior Vice President of Tampa Housing Authority. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, disparities within home ownership and housing affordability, we know that they have existed for decades. So why is it that after the 1968 Fair Housing Act prohibited housing discrimination, we're still seeing these disparities to this day?
Yeah, certainly there's a lot of reasons that, and the biggest reason is, is people. I mean, we've got to, understand that everybody in America deserves equal access to housing and treatment, and, that's where it starts. It starts with the individual.
And is there anything that can be done from your perspective to fix this?
Yeah, certainly for what we do at the Tampa Housing Authority as a HUD-funded agency is we provide housing to the citizens, period. And we ensure equal access by ensuring that we're advertising, we're recruiting, we're giving opportunities in every segment of our community. So we, make sure that we actually, have the community mirrored in our properties as we're developing it through a variety of means through the intake process.
With your level of expertise, do you find that there is a link between the racial wealth gap and the fact that there are some disparities within housing?
There's a definite link between the wealth gap. Assisted housing is intended to be temporary housing, and that's how it was originally provided. People would come in, they would get stable, they will be in a rent-controlled environment until they can actually build the income earning ability to launch out into more stable housing in the market and eventually into home ownership. And because of policies over the decades, the system has become a lot more enabling and trapping of certain populations in assisted housing and eliminating a lot of the opportunities to get out. So we've tried to focus our efforts on ensuring the quality housing and fair housing across the board, but also giving incentives and giving programs and giving opportunities to individuals to attain something greater than rental housing, which is home ownership. That is the most effective way of building family wealth, is owning a home. And we've really got to migrate more people out of the rental program into ownership program in order to achieve that.
Very well said. Thank you for your input there. I want to bring in our other panelists, and we are going to begin with Representative Fentress Driscoll. Thank you so much for joining us again. Now, you tweeted back in October that it's time to call an affordable housing emergency in Florida to lower costs. And this year, that's one of your goals. So how do you plan to address this issue in the House?
Well, thank you for the question. So just to give a little bit of context, back in the 90s, the people of Florida passed a constitutional amendment requiring certain state dollars to go towards affordable housing. But in the 20 plus years that we've had a GOP-led legislature, they continually sweep those funds, all or part of those funds, year after year. And that's resulted in a $2 billion decrease in funding that we should have had for affordable housing. So it's important to understand how we got here. So what we must do now is advocate for the adequate funding that we need. We must push for public-private partnerships so that we can expand the inventory of housing that's available and attainable for all Floridians. But it's important for the public to be informed so that they can make sure that they elect individuals who represent their values, including making sure that every Floridian has a safe and affordable place to live.
Thank you for your input, Representative. I also want to loop in Ms. Janie Karaoke. She is with the St. Pete Tenants Union. And can you tell us, as a Pinellas County resident and someone who advocates for more affordable housing, what issues are you seeing there on the ground?
So my name is Janie Karaoke, and I'm seeing tons of issues. I do want to address, someone stated about the stable market housing. The market isn't stable, which is why we do need regulations. I'm seeing a plethora of issues. And when it comes down to, and we talked about, well, it was talked about, home ownership was talked about, and we saw in 2008 that even people who own their own homes can have their own homes taken away, and they are considered bank tenants. I will say overall poverty is rising, but we see that the overall poverty rose from 10.6% in 2019 to 13.8% in 2021, but Black poverty rose from 16.7% in 2019 to 23% in 2021, whereas white poverty rose from 8.8% in 2019 to 10.5% in 2021. So we see huge disparities there. And I also heard the HUD Act mentioned. Now, the area median income, the AMI, is used to determine eligibility for subsidized, quote unquote, affordable or workforce housing. Most programs use HUD's metric, which is updated every April by combining census data, but for the Clearwater, Tampa, St. Pete, Petersburg Metropolitan Statistical Area, MSA, the current AMI is $82,100 for a family of four. However, using the same metric AMI for a Black family of four, it comes out to only $61,800. And this is even lower than the 80% AMI for a family of four, $65,700, which is also the minimum threshold for a so-called workforce housing. This means the majority of Black households do not qualify for workforce housing and are at a greater disadvantage for securing even many affordable units.
As far as her referencing what's going on with HUD?
Well, HUD actually provides funding for affordable housing development. The federal budget dictates how much HUD can actually push out into the various programs. Clearly, we've had a lot of division in our national leadership, and spurts of progress is not sufficient to create stability in our communities, and we've got to be able to fix the mechanism for funding affordable housing so that it really does continue to flow as the populations continue to grow so that we can meet the challenges.
Thank you for that. Congresswoman Kathy Castor, I do want to address you as well. In January of last year, you held a roundtable focusing on the housing crisis. What work has been done since then?
Well, Janie is right. We're in a housing squeeze unlike anything we've seen before in the Tampa Bay area, especially for our Black neighbors. So from the federal level, the most important thing is that we are good partners to our local communities. Under the American Rescue Plan, we delivered with the Biden administration historic funding for Hillsborough County, for Pinellas County, the city of St. Pete. And they have taken a lot of those dollars. The city of St. Petersburg has devoted 75% of its American Rescue Plan dollars, about $34 million, to addressing the housing squeeze. In Hillsborough, they devoted about $54 million, including the outright purchase of an apartment complex on Bush Boulevard, Armature Place, in partnership with the Communities to Development Corporation to Develop Communities of Tampa, where they are rehabbing the units and making them available to people who are in that housing crunch. We've done, our local communities have been such good stewards with those dollars. Just 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration announced that they are sending an additional $2.5 million to Hillsborough County, an additional $1.3 million to Pinellas County. But we're going to need the larger projects too, like Encore in the heart of Tampa, where we now have 800 affordable units. What's happening in West River, we've got to replicate this in St. Pete and Pinellas as well. I know Mr. Moore will say Robles Park is also on the list to do because the conditions of that apartment complex are not up to standard, and we have the ability to make them available, build more affordable units in those areas. But I want to thank Rep. Driscoll for fighting the fight in Tallahassee. Because they sweep our Affordable Housing Trust Fund every year, it's made it harder to make sure that our neighbors have safe and affordable housing.
Well, and thank you for your input. We do have a student from USF who has a question. Let's take a listen.
What initiatives are you guys putting into place to make sure that students, especially Black students, have affordable housing in the USF area?
And I'll leave that question to you. Coming from USF, I do know that area very well, and Congresswoman Castor even kind of referenced that. So how do you address that problem?
Yeah, certainly, and I think, there's a few things. One, we have to continue to do what we've recently been doing, which is focusing on that area in particular. We've got some great CDCs that are doing awesome work, private companies like Blue Sky that are doing new developments in that immediate area. We have historic funding from both our city as well as our county coming into affordable housing this year. That needs to continue because we found ourselves into a bigger crisis than we always have been in. Mm-hmm. It's just that the crisis now impacts people way beyond just the individuals that were seeking affordable housing previously. And the second thing I think we need to realize is that we can't build all the housing near school. We can't build all the housing near jobs. We've got to build housing, and we've got to embrace densities in Tampa. Tampa is now an urban center. It's an urban community. And we've got to embrace density and build appropriate density within our area and then we've got to connect it with transportation. That's the last part of it. We can't fix housing without fixing transportation because people don't live, work, and recreate in one defined community. This is a region, and we've got to realize that people need to be able to navigate affordably, and they need to be able to live and recreate and seek those work opportunities in a much broader area, but they need to be able to do it effectively and affordably.
All right, thank you to our wonderful panelists. After the break, we're taking a look at the growing social justice movement.
If you have an officer, if he's already a racist, do you really believe he's going to be unbiased when he deals with someone that he doesn't like?
The death of another black man at the hands of police is ringing through the American consciousness. And here in the Bay Area, a man says he is lucky to be alive after a violent encounter. Our Stacey DeSilva delves into how allegations of police brutality can create mistrust between police officers and people of color.
State investigators are looking into what happened the night Antoine Glover was stopped by Lakeland police officers. A case that, for some, highlights the tension between black people and police officers who are supposed to serve them.
I fear for my life, I fear for my daughter's life, everybody's life.
In December, Antoine Glover was stopped by Lakeland police for not wearing a seatbelt. Officers smelled marijuana. Glover says he had a medical marijuana card on him. Still, cell phone video shows Glover ended up on the ground.
Don't put my dad in his face!
Where he was repeatedly punched and stun-gunned by police. Officers claim he was resisting.
After all of that, I sat in the back of the police car and I cried. And I just thank God that they didn't kill me that night.
4 officers are now on paid leave. Glover was arrested, but he is alive, unlike Tyree Nichols, the 29-year-old beaten to death by Memphis police officers.
This violent act was not in pursuit of public safety.
His name, the latest in a list of unarmed black men killed or injured by police dating back to the 90s and Rodney King.
That really brought to the forefront of viciousness because it must have been 8 officers around him.
Terry Coney is president of the NAACP Lakeland chapter. He says these incidents have an impact on the local level, no matter where they happen.
You don't have to have things happening in Lakeland for to have that distrust of the police, because you have 24-hour news cycle, you have everybody has a camera.
Coney says he had the talk with his own son to always comply with police. To make change, Coney supports community policing, more direct interaction between officers and the people they serve.
Instead of policing and law enforcement, let's pursue it from a public safety standpoint.
Lakeland Police is in the process of rolling out body cameras. As for the Glover case, the chief says he appreciates FDLE taking on the investigation into the officers and vows to cooperate with any requests. In Lakeland, I'm Stacey DeSilva.
And we begin this conversation with our panelists. I want to start off with St. Pete's Chief of Police, Anthony Holloway. Now, you see cases like Antoine Glover and many cases around our nation. Some of these not happening too far from the St. Pete community. When you see instances like these, do you take a moment to reflect and kind of look at your practices that you have going on within your police department?
I do. Every time we see an incident like this, I ask my training staff and I ask my command staff, doing right and what are we doing wrong and what can we do better? Because, you know, every department has an officer like that. And then how do you address that issue when it does happen? You know, one officer can affect the other 600 officers that we have here. So we have to make sure that we all, it starts at the top and it works its way down to the bottom and bottom back up to the top. So we all got to make sure we're on the same sheet of music. And then when we see things like that, we try to make sure that we can make sure that it doesn't happen here in St. Pete.
Thank you for that. And Tampa City Councilman Orlando Gootz. Now, many in the black community, they just simply do not trust the police. Now, you're a councilman in a city that currently does not have a permanent police chief. And we saw a lot of back and forth with the confirmation of former Chief O'Connor. What is being done differently as it relates to the process of getting a new permanent police chief of Tampa?
Well, as of right now, my understanding, the mayor put out something with the paper that she's going to wait till after the election to have a national search for a police chief. And that way you'll have a new council or some of the same council members here to be able to follow that process, who have been here, who understand the need of what this city and the police department really actually for this community needs. For me, is making sure that we have a police chief that is community-oriented, policing-oriented. So a police chief who has done it, police chief who can go in there and make sure officers understand how to deal with community issues, how to deal with communities, understand culture, and also making sure that sometimes I say fear. Make sure officers not fear certain communities. Making sure they're engaged and having scenarios that they understand how to approach people. Sometimes attitude and tone and voice mechanism is key sometimes in certain communities. I always say in Hispanic communities, they talk with their hands loud. They're not being aggressive. That's their culture. I talk loud. Some people think that I'm aggressive, but that's just the way I talk. And again, understanding culture, I think, is the key with any new police chief, and having a good diverse background in community policing.
Ms. Lewis, as president of the NAACP, you've led the charge in calling for changes to the Citizens Review Board, as well as the hiring of the police chief. What changes do you want to see?
I would really like to see the Citizen Review Board to have more power. It needs to have subpoena power. It needs to have its own general counsel. It needs to be able to hold Tampa Police Department accountable, and it needs to be able to answer the call of the people and listen to the people.
Very well said. Now, we do have a question from a student from USF. Let's listen in.
Okay, I'd like to ask the city councilman why you would not overturn the mayor's veto to the independent attorney for the Citizens Review Board.
Councilman Gootz, do you have an answer?
That's simple. I voted to overturn the mayor's veto. I did my job. The citizens told me what they wanted. It's their police department. It's their city. They're the taxpayers. They asked for subpoena power. I voted for that as well. I can't look at a city and not do what they asked me to do. It's my assignment, and that's what the vast majority of the public wanted. Even though the police union did not want that, I don't think it's a problem. I was a police officer for a long time. If I'm not doing anything out there, beating anybody, hurting anybody, I don't see an issue. Of course, when our police officers Bill of Rights, you couldn't subpoena a police officer anyway because of the legislation. But as far as the subpoena power they were asking for, I didn't see a harm in it. Don't see a harm in the council. And again, I did the test of time, and I supported the overturn the veto.
Thank you, Councilman, for your answer. We do have another question from a resident in St. Pete.
My name is Ronnie Butler. I've lived here all my life. I'm 69 years old. I would like to ask the panel, what can you all do about gun violence in the neighborhoods? I've lost 3 sons to gun violence. That's my question. I would like to know, what can you all do about the training?
Chief Holloway, do you have an answer?
Sure. So first of all, I would say it starts at home with our parents, teaching our kids about gun safety, teaching our kids that once they pull that trigger and that bullet leaves that gun, you can't say I'm sorry. It's too late to say I'm sorry. It happens. The other part of it is working with law enforcement, calling in on the tips when you hear gun violence or you see gun violence. We all want the same thing. We don't want those type of people living in our community. So it takes both of us working together. Here in St. Pete, we have a team that's called GRIT, Gun Response Investigation Team. Anytime there's a shooting, we have a team respond so we can collect the shells at the scene, so we can identify where that shell came from. Maybe we'll find a gun and we can close those cases out. But it comes down to the parents educating. And I know Tampa had the same problem we have. People that have guns, that are not responsible gun owners. They leave their guns in their cars unlocked, and that gun can turn around and hurt our community. So it comes down to gun safety and education. That's how we can reduce some of this gun violence.
And as far as any training with your officers, how do you plan on instituting that?
The officers are trained on that when someone calls in, complain about shots fired, they will go in that area, they will search that area. They will talk to the people in the community, not drive around and just say, I don't hear anything. Get out of your car and talk to people so they can help you solve the problem that they're having in the community.
And thank you for that answer. And thank you to you 3, Councilman Gootz, NAACP President Yvette Lewis, and Chief Holloway with the St. Petersburg Police Department for joining us this evening. Now, there is so much more of the state of Black Tampa Bay. Coming up, our panelists offer their final thoughts.
I think the state of Black Tampa Bay is still in transition. Still in transition. If you go out on the intersection of I-4 and 75 and you look up, you're going to see stars and bars. They got a Confederate flag in this city in a major intersection that they want to call the next great American city. Are you kidding me? You got a long way to go.
And as we wrap up our town hall this evening, we have Representative Fentress Driscoll, NAACP President Yvette Lewis, St. Pete Police Chief Anthony Holloway, as well as Tampa City Councilman Orlando Gootz. I would like to thank each of you all for joining us this evening, and I want you to express what you think the current state of Black Tampa Bay is, and what are you doing to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. I'll start with Representative Driscoll.
First said this, but it's once been said that when America has a cold, the Black community catches the flu, meaning that sometimes the effects of what's happening in our communities are exacerbated or stronger in the Black community. So I would say, the state of the Black community, though, is the same as it is everywhere else in Florida. Everybody wants the same thing. The Black community also wants the freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. And while I see the fulfillment of some of those promises in our communities, I mean, look, we have our first Black mayor of St. Pete in Ken Welch. And while we have a great mayor in Tampa, Mayor Jane Castor, hopefully someday soon young Black people in Tampa can also see themselves reflected in their mayor's office. I guess I say that to say, yes, we have some progress, but I do still think we have a long way to go. We have challenges including the school to prison pipeline, housing affordability, economic opportunity. So as a state lawmaker, those are my goals, focusing on the policies that actually could help our communities be healthy, prosperous, and safe. Yes, I fight back and push against the culture wars when they come to me, but in terms of the legislation that I push, it is for lower property insurance rates. It is for housing affordability and those types of metrics that really will give everybody the chance that they need to succeed in life. I've done a lot of work around abandoned African-American cemeteries right here in Tampa Bay and all across the state. And I fight to make sure that that is taught as part of the curriculum for Black history in our schools so that our young people learn about Florida's racially segregated past and so that we make sure that we don't repeat those same mistakes in the future.
And thank you for that. We only have a few more minutes. Chief Holloway.
I think we have to continue. We've made a great progress in the Tampa area, but we still have a lot of work to do because when something happens in our nation, then we're all affected by it. The way we talk about things here, and I know in the Tampa Bay area, is that you shouldn't just see a law enforcement also when there's something bad in the community. You should be seeing a law enforcement in the community each and every day so you can build that. We have some great community leaders here in the Tampa Bay area. The people I see here on this, they're willing to meet us halfway. Law enforcement got to be willing to meet them halfway, and also the community. Again, you shouldn't just see me when there's something bad happening in the community. You should see me or see us each and every day. We've done a lot of great work, but we got to continue to do this work. We can't continue to put walls up. There's a gentleman got killed. Okay, so how do we make sure that doesn't happen in the Tampa Bay area? We just got to keep training and we got to keep the communication going. Very well said. Councilman Gootz?
For me, it's equity. If you can't eat, a roof over your head, 4 walls, that's tragic. For me, it's making sure that I have an equitable city that is distributing money to our folks and our small businesses, especially our small Black businesses, making sure the playing field is level. That's what I've been doing with our contracts, making sure when those contracts come for me, I always ask, what are the EBO numbers? Because I want to make sure everyone is eating and no one's going hungry. We'll continue to put that challenge. As you talk about the state of the Black community or the state of Black folks in general, we have to make sure that we're engaged, that we understand what's going on, understand the politics of our city, our state, and our government, to be involved. As you talk about police issues, making sure that the police understands, like Chief Holloway has mentioned, you can't come around when it's bad. And I've said before, police have to be engaged at all times with the community, coaching at PAL, being involved in activities. A lot of times we have a lot of our police officers who live outside of our city limits or our jurisdiction that come in-house. But I need officers who can be here on a constant basis to understand, I know little Johnny, I know his mom, I know his dad, like I once did as a police officer, always being coaching, knowing if there's a problem, they can come to me, or Johnny got in trouble, call Coach Orlando, call Officer G, he'll handle it, he'll talk to him. Those are the kind of things officers have to understand. And when you're engaged with a community, the community will help you at all times, especially with law enforcement issues. I can't show up when it's all bad and not understand. And culture is a key component of policing. If I don't understand how people live, eat, and sleep, if I don't understand their cultural habits, then I don't understand that community. And I have to have people to understand people. And that's what I try to do and teach others. Understand all cultures, because there's things that I don't know in other cultures that I have learned, and now I have gotten better with dealing with that culture. That makes me a better councilman, and police and people that work with our city government better people talk.
And in our final minute here, NAACP President Yvette Lewis.
So our position is that we want to make sure that everyone has a voice and everyone has an opportunity to express their concerns and what's going on in the community. And most important, that all elected officials and even city government is listening to the people. It's so important that they listen and understand. They come out, want our votes, but when it's time for them to actually listen to the people and put stuff to action, that's where the problem comes in. So the state of Black America, Black folks in Tampa, is really dismal. It's really not that good, and you would expect for us to be farther along in the year 2020. We still have a lot of work to do here in Tampa. There are many issues. Our communities look way different than other communities here in the city of Tampa. Our schools look different than other, if you go in other places here in Tampa. There's a dividing line that divide the us from them, the have and the have-nots. The rich is richer and the poor is poorer. So we still have a lot of work to do. And again, if you don't know your history, you tend to repeat yourself. So Tampa is repeating itself when it comes to the African-American cemeteries. We just lost a great cemetery to a bidder that has really hurt African-American people, because that it is a part of our history. So Tampa needs to do a lot on preserving our history, understanding our history, and knowing our history. So we have a lot of work to do.
And thank you all for your input. I truly appreciate it. Thank all of you for joining us for this very important conversation. Hopefully you received all of the messages from people in our community, and we will continue advocating for them. We'll be right back. I'd like to thank our guests for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us tonight, and to the members of the Tampa Bay community who stepped up to ask the tough questions to hold our leaders accountable. And a special thank you to our viewers for sharing this experience. From all of us right here at News Channel 8, this has been Honoring Black History, the state of Black Tampa Bay. Good night.